Hey y'all, Chakra-X here. Today I'll be demonstrating some effects that I used in my animations for pretty much for what you can make your work look like after you're done drawing and animating it. Like right now in this scene, you see a background made, you see a character that was drawn in Toon Boom with like cell shading. But after I go into After Effects and add all the gradients and lighting and other effects to it, I like it to look like this, for example, and that's how I attempt to make my work look like television, like, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to show you some tricks that I learned throughout the years to push your animation beyond just the cell shaded stuff you make in Flash or Toon Boom. So here we actually have my character Luna. She's a moon-based fighter. A lot of her powers derive from very, lunar-based abilities. One of them being that her weapons change forms depending on what phase of the moon she wants to reference. So right now she's dual wielding two scimitars because she's in crescent mode. And I'm going to show you, how I'm going to mix her with the background and the moon behind her to make it feel a lot more cinematic and a lot more color focused outside of just what we see here. I used the exact same effect for my Wrath of Nazu series, for those of you curious about that. I didn't want to use a Nazu scene in this because I'm saving that for when I start talking about energy balls and R's and stuff like that. And I also didn't want to spoil anything with Nazu. So instead I wanted to show you some original content to demonstrate these skills. So the first step on what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to Effect, Blur, and Gaussian Blur, and let's try making it 10. Okay, that's like out of focus now. It's a little too much. Let's change it to 6. Still a little too blurry. Let's try 4. There we go. Cool. Yeah, so the goal is not to make her like super blurry. It's just to take her out of, to make her not as crisp as what the original export had. And you might be thinking, well, Aaron, why would you want it to be like blurry? It's in the world of high definition content, in 4K content, wouldn't that be not ideal? But for this case, because my style is definitely leaning toward anime, I don't want it too crisp. In fact, let's dial it down to 3, so it's not too blurry. Yeah, there you go. I don't want it too crisp because if you ever watch, cartoons made in like the early 2000s, they weren't super crisp. They had even when high definition was a thing, the lines aren't super crisp because either they are like ink drawings that were scanned into the computer, or they're celluloid being photographed in real time. And when you use tools like that, it's not as crisp as a computer would make it, and it gives a nice tactile feel to it. And I want to emulate that texture with my art. So by adding a slight, very subtle blur, it helps take away the computery feel from it. And that was this a way to use technology to emulate the lack of technology, I guess you could say, in like the 90s and early 2000s. So now that I have my blur on an adjustment layer, in fact, I'm going to name this blur noise. Always name your layers, kids, especially if you're working with a team of others. But now that I have the blur, we're going to actually go to Noise and Grain. We're going to go to Add Grain. And let's change the preview mode to Final Output. And let's see what a 0.2. Like, this is way too noisy. Like, this is like distracting. 0.2. That's a little too subtle. Let's try 0.4. There we go. Yes. So now, again, I can't tell if you can see this video on YouTube or not, but by adding a very slight grain, now it feels like this is a photograph. This was paper instead of just pixels. And it's subtle enough that it doesn't take away from the art, but it's apparent enough that I feel like it adds another sense of, I don't know, texture, tactileness to the art. So that's what I do with a lot of stuff. Like even if I didn't want glows and lighting or what have you, a lot of my animations, if I'm going for it, I usually add this, a noise effect and a slight blur effect. But now what I want to do, because she's standing in like this dark, forest with the moon behind her, I need to make her her color match the background better. And by the way, I did not draw this background. These were, I wish I was a better artist. This was all made in Clip Studio. I grabbed like a moon asset, tree assets, and cloud assets, and organized it in a way to make it look like a low shot background for Luna. So what we're gonna do now is I'm going to duplicate Luna's layer, and I'm going to call it Gradients. And I'm gonna go to Effect, Generate Gradient Ramp. There we go. So I'll make her top color like a purplish blue. I'll make her bottom color a midnight blue. That kind of matches up with the colors that I have in the background. So now I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to soft light. There we go. She's a little more purple in the face than I would like for the lighting I currently have. So let's make it a little more blue. There we go. And let's also color correction, edit brightness. There we go. So now, again, with a few tweaks, she now blends in much better with the background. Like having her in like, I guess, a room, like an indoor room lighting versus the background, it's kind of jarring. So you want to try to make sure your animation matches the background that you're in. And there's multiple ways to color correct. I just like to use gradients because I feel like I get more control with my 2D art. But there's dozens of color correction methods in After Effects to approach this. But now that I have her base color set, I now want to create a rim light. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate the Luna full layer, raise it above the gradient layer, and set it to screen. And I want to color correct this a little bit as well, so I'm going to go to Effect, Color Correction, color balance. And this is what I was saying. There's many different approaches to how you can color correct things. So I'm going to pretty much just increase the blue hues of this layer. So like the highlight blues, the midtone blues, and the shadow blues. There you go. And I'm going to duplicate this layer again. Name the top layer Rim Light Matte, and the bottom layer Rim Light. And I'm gonna go to track. So on Rim Light, I'm gonna go to Track Matte, Alpha Inverted Matte. And now I'm pretty much using these two layers to hide each other. Because what I'm gonna do is taking the top layer, which is the top layer is pretty much acting as the mask of the layer below it. So what I'm gonna do is shift the mask a little bit over to make like this diagonal edge on her to look as if the moon behind her is lighting her. And I want to push this a little farther by blurring the matte layer, so it's not quite of a harsh edge. Let's blur it by, let's say, 10. Let's try 20. A little too much. Let's make it 15. There we go. That's cool. And now I'm going to go to the rim light layer. Go to Effect, Stylize, glow. I'm going to mess with the threshold, which dictates how light or dark it needs to be to get the glow effect. I don't want it, that looks weird. That's a little too hot for what's going on. So I need to bring it down to like 35. Increase the radius. Ooh, still too much. Let's actually there we go. There we go. It's very subtle, but now all the brightest colors are like glowing a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So now we have like this subtle like glow effect on the parts that we feel like might be like shimmering a little bit out of the moon, which is usually like the brighter parts, especially the metal on her swords. So if we were to just play this back real quick. Yeah, see again, this is all just one looping sequence, and I was able to add pretty much, again, a bunch of lighting and color effects without having to draw anything else. Like there are some things I would clean up, like this halo here. I almost want to kind of like mask that out. If you ever get effects like this that you're like not too happy about, I'm gonna pretty much just mask it out. So by grabbing the pen tool up here, I'm just going to select this. Open up my mask and tell it to subtract. So now, there we go. Cool. I'm gonna clean up the rim light even further. Like I want to get rid of maybe the one on her arm. That looks a little distracting. That subtracts. And this thigh is fine, but I don't know if I want it on this thigh. So let's get rid of that. There we go. So the last effect that I want to put on, at least on the arts, I want the swords to glow a little bit, since those, I guess, are like magical weapons and they can change form. I want them to have a little more of a treatment on top of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate the Luna Forest, I'm going to duplicate the Luna Full layer, bring it above the rim light, then open up my project panel. Grab, where is it? There we go, Luna Full, and duplicate it while in the project panel. That pretty much makes a new version of my Luna composition. So what I'm gonna do is name this Luna Full Sword, I guess. And I'm gonna Alt drag it on top of this Luna Full. So that way it keeps the same parameters, the sizing, the spacing, etc. I'm gonna go into here, and as you can see, I have different parts of Luna broken apart, because when I animate a character, it's just easier to have all these different moving parts on each layer, so that way I can change it and edit it as I see fit, instead of just drawing it all in one drawing. Because if I did that, it makes it a lot harder to edit and change later on. So definitely, always animate in layers when appropriate. But what I want to do is just get the swords. So let's get rid of this, and this. Cool. Great. And now that I have just the swords, I'm going to go to Effect, Keying, Extract. I'm going to increase the black point based off the luminance. Since the yellow is the brightest color that I have showing in the swords, here I'll even isolate it so you can see. As I increase the black point, it'll hide everything but the brightest yellow parts, which is what I want here. Perfect. So I'll isolate that. I do need to mask, because this sword is supposed to be up behind her, but I want this effect on top of everything. I'm going to mask this part of the sword, invert it, or subtract it. Cool. So now I have just the swords. Now with this, I'm going to change the blending mode to screen. And now you see that the swords are like brighter, but it's just the swords, not anything else of her, or not any other part of her. It's just the swords. Again, that's the advantage of making sure you animate stuff separately. I'm actually now I'm going to go to Effects, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and blur like let's say 20. Let's stack this. There you go. So now, because I have all these blurs going on, it makes like a lighting up effect of the swords. You know, as if like they're imbued with some kind of energy. And that's what, for, you know, based off Luna's powers, that's the effect I want. So now, again, if I were to have the swords moving, that effect would also, you know, carry over with the animation. And let me make sure I save. Now to push it even farther, what I could do is, if you look at the Luna Forest layer, it's very subtle, but the clouds are drifting from right to left to, you know, to indicate like wind. But I actually had made these leaves earlier. I didn't draw these. These are actually from my particle software. Again, what I mentioned earlier from the software Trapcode Particular. And all it is it takes a sprite and it knows how to manipulate it with physics and what have you. And I did that as a little cheat to have flowing behind Luna. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to render this out and show you what it looks like in full, and we'll compare the I guess post-processing and, you know, after post-processing renders, and you can see for yourself just how much of a difference it makes. And again, not every thing I make or, you know, you make will need this amount of, you know, I guess composition to it or comping to it. But for this case, I definitely wanted, you know, these effects to drive home the theme of this shot. So I'm gonna play this in its entirety, and I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Stay tuned. Hopefully in the future I can do more with auras and other stuff. So if you're curious more about special effects or animation or storyboarding, let me know, and I can figure out, you know, what I feel comfortable sharing in terms of like how confident I am in those areas with all you. So yeah, thank you. Enjoy.